The evening sky outside was a heavy gray, a reflection of the tension within the walls of our home. I sat at the kitchen table, nervously stirring my coffee, my mind tangled in a web of thoughts. My name is Sam, and if you had asked me a year ago, I would have told you that I had a perfect life. A stable job, a loving wife, Catherine, and an eager, ambitious nephew, Alex, who had recently moved in with us after a family emergency. But now nothing felt certain. Catherine had always been a woman of few words. Quiet, reserved, and almost always distant, I couldn't help but feel as if we were living parallel lives. She seemed content in her own world, and I in mine. But there was a growing disconnect between us, something I couldn't ignore anymore. And Alex, my nephew, with his infectious smile and unshakable confidence, seemed to fill the space between us in ways I never anticipated. That night, the uncomfortable silence in our house was palpable. I had received an invitation to a high-profile work event, a charity gala, and I had been instructed to bring Catherine along as my plus one. It was an important occasion, one that required the perfect appearance. But as I glanced toward the living room, where Catherine sat, reading a book, I knew she wouldn't come. She rarely did. "Catherine," I said, trying to keep my voice even, "the gala's tonight. It's important." She barely looked up. "I'm not feeling well," she muttered, barely lifting her gaze from her book. Her voice was flat, as it often was. I let out a sigh. It was a familiar excuse, one I had learned to live with. But tonight, I couldn't let it slide. I had worked too hard to get this far. "Please, just come. It'll mean a lot." She shook her head, her refusal final. I stood there, my frustration mounting. What was I supposed to do now? I couldn't attend the event alone, not with the pressure on me. It was then that Alex appeared in the hallway, wearing that ever-present grin of his. He had been living with us for a few weeks, staying in the guest room while he got settled. He was charismatic, always eager to help, always offering to lend a hand. "Why don't I go with you, Uncle Sam?" he suggested casually, leaning against the doorframe. I blinked in surprise. "What?" "No, you don't have to." But he wasn't asking. He was offering, with an enthusiasm I hadn't seen in a long time. "Come on, I'll be a stand-in for Aunt Catherine. No one will know the difference." For a moment, I hesitated. The idea of bringing Alex, rather than Catherine, was absurd. But then, a part of me, a small, foolish part, felt a sense of relief. Maybe this could be the night I could escape the distance that had settled between us. Perhaps I could pull it off. "All right," I said, feeling a strange mix of guilt and curiosity. "Let's do it." Alex grinned, the decision made, and I couldn't help but feel that something, deep down, was shifting. The gala was in full swing by the time we arrived. The venue was grand, with sparkling chandeliers casting a soft glow over the polished floors and the hum of conversation filling the air. Alex and I stepped into the ballroom, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a brief flash of hope. Maybe this evening could bridge the gap that had widened between Catherine and me. Alex was an effortless charmer. As soon as we entered, he greeted everyone with a smile that made them feel seen, like they mattered. I could see how people gravitated toward him, drawn in by his warmth and energy. It was a sharp contrast to Catherine's cold, quiet presence, so different from the woman I had fallen in love with. I played my part well, slipping into the familiar role of the professional husband, nodding at colleagues and exchanging pleasantries. But as the evening wore on, something unexpected began to happen. Alex wasn't just pretending to be Catherine. He was surpassing her. He spoke to people with a confidence and ease I hadn't seen in her for years. He laughed with them, made them feel important, and suddenly I wasn't just watching the evening unfold, I was part of it. There were moments when I caught myself staring at him. He looked so much like Catherine when he smiled, when he turned his head just right. He wasn't my wife, but in that moment, he had become something more than just a stand-in. And what unnerved me was that I didn't mind. At one point, I found myself in a quiet corner with Alex. We had just finished a conversation with one of my business associates, and I was struck by how easily Alex navigated the social dynamics around us. "You're good at this," I said, trying to mask the growing discomfort in my chest. Alex chuckled. "I just listen," he replied with a shrug. "People want to be heard. It's not that hard." I studied him then, really looked at him. His easy confidence, his charm. It wasn't just a facade. It was who he was. In some ways, I envied him. How had I gotten so far away from that? But the longer we spent together, the more I began to realize something else. This wasn't just a role for Alex. He was starting to take liberties, to act in ways that felt intimate. During a conversation with one of my colleagues, Alex had placed his hand lightly on my arm, a gesture that felt almost too natural, too familiar. I shifted uncomfortably, trying to ignore the pang of unease that bloomed in my chest. It was then that I saw her, Catherine's old friend, Laura, walking toward us. She paused when she saw Alex, her eyes scanning him, then lingering longer than necessary. She greeted him with warmth, her smile too wide, too intimate. Something shifted in the air, a small, quiet jolt of recognition. I couldn't place it, but my unease grew. As the evening unfolded, I felt a weight settle heavily on my shoulders. The more I watched Alex interact with the people around us, the more I understood that this night wasn't just about playing a role. It was about something deeper, something unspoken. And the realization that I was a mere spectator in my own life was a truth I wasn't ready to face. But there was no turning back now. The night wore on, and the atmosphere in the ballroom seemed to shift, growing heavier, more suffocating. I couldn't shake the feeling that Alex and I were no longer just two people at a gala. We had become something else entirely, a couple no one questioned, no one scrutinized. It was as though the boundary between my wife and my nephew had blurred into something that felt uncomfortably real. By the time we were seated at the dinner table, I felt the weight of the situation settle in. My colleagues smiled at us, exchanging pleasantries, but I noticed how their glances lingered on Alex. I tried to ignore it, but the words they said to him, the way they laughed at his jokes, seemed different. They were drawn to him in a way that I hadn't seen in years with Catherine. I sat there, feeling like a stranger in my own life. Catherine's absence, her unwillingness to even pretend to join me, hung like a shadow over the table. Alex, in her place, spoke with an ease that made it clear he was no longer just filling in. He was commanding the room, drawing attention in a way that felt both exhilarating and dangerous. "Sam," a voice interrupted my thoughts. It was Laura again, Catherine's old friend. She had joined our table, her gaze constantly drifting back to Alex. "Your nephew's quite the charmer. He reminds me so much of Catherine when she was younger." I forced a smile. "Yeah, he's got away with people." Laura's smile lingered, but her eyes held something else. Curiosity. Perhaps it was innocent, or maybe it was something more. I couldn't decide, but I knew the air between us had shifted. The conversation continued, but I couldn't stop watching Alex. He had that same ease, that same charm that had drawn me to Catherine all those years ago. But now, as I watched Alex glide through the night, effortlessly commanding attention with the same traits I once admired in my wife, something in me began to twist. The unsettling thought began to take root. How much of Alex's charisma was a reflection of Catherine, and how much of it was something he had taken from her? By the time the dessert was served, I was struggling to focus. I couldn't deny it any longer. The boundaries between us were dissolving. Laura's whispered comment earlier had stuck with me, and I found myself unable to ignore the implications. Alex and I were sitting too closely, laughing too freely. In that moment, I caught him looking at me, not with the innocence I had always expected, but with something sharper, something knowing. I quickly looked away, my pulse quickening. "Uncle Sam, are you all right?" Alex's voice cut through my growing unease. I forced a smile, but it didn't reach my eyes. "Yeah, just tired. It's been a long night." But the truth was, I wasn't just tired. I was unraveling. Something was happening here that I couldn't understand, and it terrified me. As the evening drew to a close and we made our way to the exit, I felt a quiet, unsettling tension building between Alex and me. The night had exposed cracks I wasn't prepared to face. There was something shifting in me, in us, and I wasn't sure if it could be stopped. The following days were a blur. The gala had ended, but its effects lingered in the air, heavy and suffocating. Every time I looked at Alex, I saw not just my nephew, but a reflection of everything I had lost with Catherine. He had filled the void she left, but with a strange intensity that I couldn't shake. I spent the next morning in the quiet of my office, trying to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting back to the night. The way Alex had moved so easily through the crowd, the way people responded to him as though he were someone they knew, someone they could trust, it was like watching Catherine live again through him. But with a rawness I hadn't expected, a vulnerability that made him seem more real, more present than I had ever felt Catherine to be in recent years. By the time the evening rolled around, I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in my chest any longer. I had to confront this, confront what had shifted. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I found myself standing at my front door, staring out into the yard. It had been a long time since I had felt this unsure about anything, especially about the people closest to me. When Alex knocked, I didn't hesitate to let him in. There was something about him now, something that felt too close, too dangerous. But I couldn't push him away. Not after everything he had done for me. Not after the role he had played at the gala. I needed to understand. "Sam," he said as he stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room. There was no mistaking the tension that had built between us. He knew it too. "We need to talk." I didn't speak right away. Instead, I motioned for him to sit. The silence between us felt oppressive, the weight of unspoken words pressing on my chest. Alex was the first to break it. "I know what you're feeling. This isn't just about me standing in for Catherine. It's more than that, isn't it?" I glanced at him, my pulse quickening. "What do you mean?" He looked at me steadily, as if weighing the words carefully. "You're feeling something uncomfortable. You think I'm replacing her, that I'm taking something from you. But the truth is, Sam, I'm not trying to be Catherine. I'm trying to be something better. I'm trying to be someone who sees you. Someone who really sees you." His words cut through the air, a sharp contrast to the silence that had hung over us. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words felt lodged in my throat. Was he right? Had I been so blinded by my own loneliness, my own frustrations with Catherine, that I had let Alex slip into a role that was never meant for him? "You don't need to pretend to be her," I finally said, my voice strained. "I don't need that." Alex's gaze softened, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something genuine behind the walls he had built. "I'm not pretending to be her, Sam. I'm just trying to give you what you've been missing. What you've wanted from Catherine for so long." The truth hit me like a punch to the gut. Alex had become the person I had been waiting for without even realizing it. But now I had to face the consequences. The line between us had blurred, and I wasn't sure if there was any going back. As the silence stretched between us, I felt the weight of my own betrayal press in. Would I be able to walk away from this? Or had something far more dangerous taken root?